The luxurious international flight was cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet, gliding through the clouds like a silver bird. The cabin buzzed with quiet conversations and the occasional clink of glasses as passengers settled into their seats, ready for the long journey ahead. Among them sat Amara Thompson, a young woman whose name carried weight in social circles worldwide. She was the only daughter of Marcus Thompson, a self-made billionaire who had revolutionized the tech industry with his cutting-edge artificial intelligence innovations. At just 24 years old, Amara had already made headlines, not always for the right reasons. But tonight she seemed determined to enjoy herself. Dressed in designer attire from head to toe, Amara occupied one of the plush first-class seats, surrounded by her entourage, two friends chatting animatedly beside her, and a personal assistant scrolling through emails on a tablet. Her presence commanded attention, not just because of her wealth, but also because of her larger-than-life personality. To some, she exuded confidence. To others, arrogance. Either way, there was no denying that Amara knew how to make an entrance and leave an impression. As the plane soared above the ocean, the flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, ensuring every passenger's needs were met. One of these attendants was Claire Bennett, a seasoned professional who had spent nearly a decade working in aviation. Claire prided herself on maintaining composure under pressure, even when dealing with difficult passengers. With her warm smile and calm demeanor, she had earned praise from countless travelers over the years. But tonight something felt different. An uneasy tension lingered in the air. When Claire approached Amara's row to take drink orders, she greeted the group politely. "Good evening, Miss Thompson," she said, recognizing the famous surname. "Can I get you anything to start your flight?" Amara glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. "Champagne," she replied curtly without making eye contact, "and make sure it's chilled." Claire nodded, unfazed by the lack of warmth. "Of course, any preferences for the brand?" "Just bring me whatever is most expensive," Amara shot back, her tone dripping with entitlement. Her friends giggled behind her, exchanging knowing looks. It wasn't unusual for Amara to flaunt her wealth, but tonight, there was an edge to her voice, a simmering impatience that hinted at trouble brewing beneath the surface. Moments later, Claire returned with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a crystal flute. She carefully poured the golden liquid, taking care not to spill a single drop. But fate has a way of intervening when least expected. As Claire leaned forward to place the glass on Amara's tray table, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. For a split second, everything jolted. The bottles rattled, seatbelts tightened, and Claire's hand slipped. A splash of champagne spilled onto Amara's pristine white dress, leaving a dark stain across the fabric. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Claire's eyes widened in shock as she realized what had happened. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, grabbing a napkin to blot the spill. "Let me help you clean this up." But Amara didn't move. Instead, she stared down at her ruined dress, her jaw tightening with barely contained fury. Then, slowly, she looked up at Claire, her dark eyes blazing with anger. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" she demanded, her voice rising sharply. "This isn't just some random outfit, it's custom made, and now it's ruined." "I truly apologize," Claire said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. "It was an accident, please let me assist you." "No," Amara interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You don't understand. This isn't about the dress, it's about respect. You clearly don't know how to do your job properly." Her words carried a venomous sting, drawing curious glances from nearby passengers. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others discreetly pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Claire swallowed hard, feeling the weight of Amara's words pressing down on her. She had dealt with rude passengers before, but this felt different. There was a calculated cruelty in Amara's tone, as if she delighted in tearing people apart. Still, Claire forced herself to remain calm. "I assure you, I take my responsibilities very seriously. Accidents happen, especially during turbulence. Let me fetch something to help remove the stain." But Amara wasn't interested in solutions. "Don't bother," she snapped, crossing her arms defiantly. "What I want is for someone competent to handle this situation. Clearly, you're not qualified to be here. The comment stung more than Claire cared to admit. She had worked tirelessly to build her career, enduring grueling hours and unpredictable schedules, all while maintaining professionalism in the face of adversity. Yet here she was, being publicly humiliated by someone who likely hadn't worked a day in her life. Something inside Claire snapped. Before she could stop herself, Claire reached out and slapped Amara squarely across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin like a gunshot, silencing every conversation instantly. Everyone froze, their eyes darting between the two women. Amara's hand flew to her cheek, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Even Claire seemed stunned by her own actions, her fingers trembling as she stepped back. For several agonizing seconds, no one spoke. Then Amara broke the silence with a shrill cry. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea who I am?" She grabbed her phone, her manicured nails tapping furiously against the screen. "This isn't over. Not even close." Passengers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. A few whispered among themselves, speculating about what would happen next. Meanwhile, Claire stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had crossed a line, but deep down, part of her couldn't regret it. Not after the way Amara had treated her. Little did anyone realize this incident was only the beginning of a chain reaction that would spiral far beyond the confines of the airplane. As the tension in the first-class cabin reached its peak, Amara Thompson sat fuming in her seat, her face still stinging from the unexpected slap. Her friends hovered around her, whispering words of outrage and support, but they could do little to calm her down. She clutched her phone tightly, scrolling through her contacts until she found the one name she knew would fix everything: her father, Marcus Thompson. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge and justice. The call connected almost instantly. On the other end of the line, Marcus Thompson's deep, authoritative voice greeted her. "Amara, sweetheart, what's wrong?" he asked, sensing the urgency in her tone. Despite his gruff exterior, Marcus had always been fiercely protective of his daughter. He built his empire from nothing, and now that he had achieved unimaginable success, he spared no expense when it came to ensuring her comfort and happiness. Amara didn't waste a second. "Dad, you won't believe what just happened," she began, her voice shaking with anger. "Some flight attendant, this incompetent, rude woman, just slapped me, right here in front of everyone. And not only that, she ruined my dress too." Marcus's expression hardened as he listened to his daughter recount the details of the incident. His jaw tightened, and his grip on the phone grew firmer. To him, this wasn't just about a slap or a ruined dress. It was about respect. Respect for his family, his legacy, and most importantly, his daughter. No one treated a Thompson this way and got away with it. "Where are you now?" Marcus asked sharply, already formulating a plan in his mind. "We're still in the air," Amara replied, her voice rising slightly. "But Dad, you need to do something. This is unacceptable. I can't let her get away with this." "I'll handle it," Marcus assured her, his tone firm and resolute. "Don't worry, sweetheart. By the time we're done, she'll regret ever stepping foot on that plane." With that promise made, Marcus ended the call and immediately sprang into action. He picked up his office phone and dialed the private number of the airline's CEO, Richard Langston, a man who owed much of his career to Marcus's investments and influence. When Richard answered, Marcus wasted no time getting to the point. "Richard, we have a situation," Marcus began, his voice cold and commanding. "My daughter is currently on one of your flights and she's been mistreated by one of your employees. A flight attendant physically assaulted her, in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses. You and I both know how these things work. If word gets out, it won't look good for either of us," Richard stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Marcus, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'll look into it immediately." "You'll do more than look into it," Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Here's what's going to happen. That plane will be grounded upon arrival. The employee responsible will be removed from duty and handed over to airport security. I want a full investigation started before the passengers even disembark. Do I make myself clear? Richard hesitated for a brief moment, weighing the implications of defying one of the airline's largest investors. Finally, he relented. Yes, Marcus, it'll be taken care of. Satisfied with Richard's response, Marcus leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing on his lips. He knew exactly how to wield his power, and he wasn't afraid to use it. For him, this wasn't just about teaching a lesson, it was about sending a message. No one messed with a Thompson without facing severe consequences. Meanwhile, back on the plane, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Passengers whispered among themselves, speculating about what would happen next. Some sympathized with Claire, believing Amara had brought the slap upon herself with her entitled behavior. Others sided with Amara, arguing that physical violence was never acceptable regardless of the circumstances. A few bold individuals even approached Claire cautiously, offering quiet words of encouragement and solidarity. One elderly passenger, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret, patted Claire gently on the arm. "You did what you thought was right," she said softly. "Whatever happens, don't lose faith in yourself." Claire managed a weak smile, though her hands were still trembling. She appreciated the kindness but couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew better than anyone that powerful people like the Thompsons didn't take slights lightly. Whatever punishment awaited her, it wouldn't be mild. As the plane descended toward its destination, the pilot announced over the intercom that there would be a slight delay upon landing due to unforeseen operational issues. The vague explanation only fueled the rumors swirling throughout the cabin. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, wondering if they'd be allowed to leave the plane at all. Some joked about being stuck in a real-life soap opera, while others braced themselves for potential chaos. When the wheels finally touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, the mood inside became electric with anticipation. Outside, airport, staff scrambled to prepare for the unusual scene unfolding within the aircraft. Security personnel arrived, flanked by representatives from the airline, all under strict instructions to follow Marcus Thompson's demands to the letter. The door opened, and the first faces to appear were those of the authorities. They moved swiftly down the aisle, their presence sending ripples of unease through the cabin. When they reached Claire, they gestured for her to stand. Her colleagues watched helplessly as she was escorted off the plane, her head held high despite the weight of the situation. Back in first class, Amara observed the commotion with a mixture of satisfaction and vindication. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms triumphantly. Justice, as far as she was concerned, had been served. But unbeknownst to her, the story was far from over. What began as a single act of defiance was about to spiral into a global spectacle, one that would challenge perceptions of privilege, accountability, and humanity itself. As the plane's engines powered down and the doors finally opened, a wave of tension swept through the cabin. Passengers stretched their legs, eager to disembark after the long and eventful flight, but airport security personnel blocked the aisles, signaling that no one would be leaving just yet. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people pieced together what was happening. Claire Bennett, the flight attendant who had slapped Amara Thompson, was being led off the plane in handcuffs, her face pale but composed. Cameras flashed as news crews stationed outside captured the dramatic scene, broadcasting it live to millions around the world. Amara sat stiffly in her seat, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of triumph and simmering anger, but she couldn't resist glancing toward the commotion near the front of the plane. She felt vindicated seeing Claire escorted away, yet there was an unsettling heaviness in the air. The weight of public scrutiny was beginning to settle over her, and she knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Social media platforms were already ablaze with hashtags like Summer First Class Slapgate and our Billionaire vs Flight Attendant, with users debating whether Claire's actions were justified or completely out of line. Meanwhile, Claire found herself surrounded by officials once she stepped onto the jet bridge. Reporters shouted questions at her, their voices overlapping in a chaotic din. Did you really slap her? What made you do it? How does it feel knowing you've been arrested? Claire kept her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to engage. Inside, however, her mind raced. She replayed the incident over and over again. The spilled champagne, Amara's cutting remarks, the moment her hand connected with the billionaire's daughter's cheek. Had it been worth it? Would anyone understand? Why she'd lost control? Back on the plane, passengers began speculating about what would happen next. Some openly criticized Amara, claiming they'd witnessed her rude behavior throughout the flight. One businessman leaned over to his seatmate and muttered, "That poor flight attendant didn't deserve this. I've seen how entitled some people can get up here in first class, and Amara was giving her a hard time from the start." Others defended Amara, arguing that no matter how difficult a passenger might be, physical violence was never acceptable. A young woman traveling alone chimed in saying, "I don't care if someone insults me, I wouldn't hit them. That's not professionalism." The debate spilled beyond the confines of the airplane as videos of the altercation went viral online. In grainy footage shot by fellow passengers, viewers could see Claire pouring champagne, the sudden jolt of turbulence, and then the explosive confrontation that followed. Comment sections exploded with opinions. Some called Claire a hero for standing up to arrogance and privilege. Others labeled her reckless and unprofessional. Memes mocking both women spread across social media, turning the incident into a cultural phenomenon overnight. By the time passengers were finally allowed to disembark, hours later, the story had taken on a life of its own. News outlets scrambled to gather more information, interviewing eyewitnesses and digging into the backgrounds of everyone involved. It didn't take long for reporters to uncover details about Amara's lifestyle, her lavish parties, frequent appearances in tabloids, and reputation for being outspoken and demanding. Clips surfaced of her previous flights, where she reportedly argued with staff and threw tantrums when things didn't go her way. While some saw these revelations as evidence of her spoiled nature, others dismissed them as attempts to smear her character. At the same time, Claire's colleagues rallied around her, speaking out in her defense. During interviews, they painted a picture of a dedicated professional who had endured years of verbal abuse and mistreatment from passengers, all without ever losing her temper until now. A former co-worker revealed that Claire had filed multiple complaints against the airline for failing to address unsafe working conditions and hostile interactions with travelers. "She's always been the calm one," the co-worker told a reporter. "If she snapped, it must have been because she'd reached her breaking point." As the narrative shifted, public opinion began tilting in Claire's favor. People started questioning whether the real issue was less about the slap and more about systemic problems within the aviation industry. Articles popped up highlighting the challenges faced by flight attendants, including low pay, grueling schedules, and a lack of support when dealing with difficult passengers. Hashtags like "Trying to support flight attendants" and "Protect our crew" trended alongside the original ones, sparking conversations about workplace protections and respect for service workers. But Marcus Thompson wasn't about to let the tide turn against his family without a fight. Known for his strategic brilliance and ruthless determination, he wasted no time launching a counterattack. He hired a high-profile PR team to manage the fallout, releasing a carefully crafted statement that portrayed Amara as the victim of an unprovoked attack. "While we acknowledge that mistakes can happen during travel, physical violence is never acceptable," the statement read. "We expect accountability and justice for this unacceptable behavior." The PR campaign worked, at least temporarily. Skeptics began questioning whether Claire had staged the entire incident to gain attention or further a personal vendetta. Critics pointed out that she hadn't denied slapping Amara and suggested that her claims of mistreatment were exaggerated. Meanwhile, Marcus doubled down on his demands, insisting that Claire face criminal charges and lose her job permanently. Despite the mounting pressure, Claire remained steadfast. Surrounded by lawyers provided by her union, she prepared to tell her side of the story publicly. In an exclusive interview with a major news network, she described the events leading up to the slap in detail, explaining how Amara's verbal attacks had pushed her past her limits. "I'm not proud of what I did," Claire admitted, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. But I want people to understand that this isn't just about me. It's about every flight attendant who has to deal with disrespect and abuse on a daily basis. We're human beings too, and we deserve to be treated with dignity. Her words resonated deeply with many viewers, reigniting discussions about empathy and understanding. For the first time, people began to see Claire not as a villain, but as a symbol of frustration, an ordinary person pushed to extraordinary measures by extraordinary circumstances. Even some of Amara's critics softened their stance, acknowledging that while her behavior may have been problematic, it didn't justify violence. Yet the battle between wealth and morality showed no signs of slowing down. As the days passed, the incident continued to dominate headlines, drawing commentary from celebrities, politicians, and everyday citizens alike. What had started as a simple disagreement between two women had evolved into something much larger, a reflection of societal tensions, power dynamics, and the complexities of human nature. And as preparations began for the official hearing that would decide Claire's fate, one thing became clear: this story was far from over. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of investigations, media coverage, and heated debates. The aviation authorities announced that they would hold a formal hearing to determine whether Claire Bennett should face criminal charges or lose her job over the slap. This decision sent shockwaves through both sides of the controversy. For Amara Thompson and her father Marcus, it was an opportunity to ensure justice was served according to their terms. For Claire and her supporters, it was a chance to shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing the airline industry, and perhaps redeem her actions in the eyes of the public. As the date for the hearing approached, anticipation reached fever pitch. Every detail of the case had been dissected endlessly online, with people passionately arguing their positions. Some viewed Claire as a symbol of resistance against entitled behavior, while others saw her as someone who crossed a professional line she shouldn't have. Meanwhile, Amara became a polarizing figure, her every move scrutinized under the microscope of public opinion. Social media posts from years ago resurfaced, painting her as spoiled and self-centered, though her defenders argued that none of that excused violence. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Reporters packed the benches, cameras rolling as lawyers, witnesses, and key figures filed in. Claire arrived wearing a simple yet polished outfit, flanked by representatives from her union and legal team. Her expression was calm, but weary, betraying the toll this ordeal had taken on her emotionally. Across the room sat Amara, dressed in another designer ensemble, exuding confidence despite the storm swirling around her. Beside her was Marcus Thompson, his presence commanding attention. He carried himself like a man accustomed to winning, his sharp suit and stern demeanor signaling that he wouldn't tolerate anything less than victory today. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecution laid out its case against Claire, emphasizing the importance of professionalism in high-stakes environments like air travel. They argued that regardless of provocation, physical violence could not be condoned, especially when committed by someone entrusted with passenger safety. This isn't just about one slap, the prosecutor declared. It's about setting a precedent for accountability. Claire's defense attorney countered by framing the incident within the broader context of workplace abuse and systemic neglect. My client has spent nearly a decade serving passengers with dedication and grace, the lawyer said. But what happened on that flight wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of years of mistreatment and unchecked hostility. Claire reached her breaking point because the system failed her. Witness testimonies followed, each adding layers of complexity to the narrative. First up was Amara herself, who recounted the events leading to the slap. She spoke confidently, describing how Claire's clumsiness ruined her expensive dress and how the subsequent argument escalated into physical violence. "I didn't ask for any of this," Amara insisted, her voice tinged with indignation. "All I wanted was an apology and some respect." Next came Claire's colleagues, who painted a starkly different picture of the situation. One veteran flight attendant described witnessing countless instances where passengers verbally abused staff without consequence. "We're told to smile, And nod no matter what, she explained. If we speak up, we risk losing our jobs. That kind of pressure takes a toll on anyone. Another coworker recalled specific incidents involving Amara during previous flights, alleging that she often treated crew members poorly and expected special treatment beyond what was reasonable. The most surprising testimony, however, came from Margaret, the elderly retired school teacher who had comforted Claire moments after the slap. Called upon as a neutral witness, Margaret recounted observing Amara's behavior throughout the flight. She wasn't pleasant to anyone, Margaret stated plainly. There was an arrogance about her, a sense that rules didn't apply. When the champagne spilled, she didn't just express frustration. She attacked Claire personally, calling her names and belittling her work. Each side presented compelling arguments, leaving the panel of aviation officials visibly conflicted. As the hearing drew to a close, closing statements highlighted the central themes of the case: privilege versus humanity, power versus vulnerability, and justice versus fairness. Both attorneys urged the panel to consider not only the facts of the incident but also its implications for society at large. Outside the courtroom, the crowd grew restless, awaiting the verdict. Protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for flight attendants and violence has no excuse." Online forums buzzed with predictions and opinions, reflecting the divided sentiments of the public. Would Claire walk free, vindicated by those who saw her as a victim of circumstance? Or would she face severe consequences, reinforcing the idea that professionalism must always come first? Back inside, the panel deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence and testimonies carefully. When they finally emerged, the room fell silent. The head official cleared his throat and began reading the decision aloud. His words were measured, acknowledging the complexities of the case before delivering the verdict. Claire would keep her job, citing extenuating circumstances and the need for systemic reform within the industry. However, she would also undergo mandatory training on conflict resolution and anger management. For many, the ruling felt like a compromise, one that neither fully punished nor exonerated Claire. But as she stood to leave the courtroom surrounded by supporters, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Perhaps this moment could spark real change, ensuring that future flight attendants wouldn't find themselves pushed to such extremes. Yet even as the hearing concluded, questions lingered. What role did privilege play in shaping the outcome? Could true accountability exist when wealth and influence loomed so heavily over the scales of justice? And most importantly, what lessons could be learned from this extraordinary saga? Unbeknownst to everyone, Marcus Thompson still had one final card to play, a revelation that would reshape the narrative once again and force all parties involved to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they lived in. The day of the Aviation Authority hearing arrived and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers packed the space, eager to witness the final chapter of what had become a global sensation. Cameras lined the walls, capturing every moment for live broadcasts, while social media feeds prepared to explode with reactions. For Claire Bennett and Amara Thompson, this was their chance to present their sides of the story. One last opportunity to sway public opinion and determine the outcome of the case. Claire entered the room flanked by her union representatives and legal team. Dressed in a simple yet professional outfit, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the overwhelming pressure. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her seat, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had spent countless hours preparing for this day, rehearsing her testimony and steeling herself for the questions that would inevitably come. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been pushed too far in a thankless job. Amara, on the other hand, arrived surrounded by an entourage that included her father, Marcus Thompson, and a team of high-powered attorneys. Clad in designer clothing and exuding confidence, she seemed determined to reclaim control of the narrative. Her PR team had coached her extensively on how to appear composed and sympathetic during the proceedings, ensuring she came across as the wronged party rather than the entitled heiress portrayed in viral videos. Still, there was a flicker of unease in her eyes, a hint that perhaps she understood the stakes were higher than she'd initially realized. The hearing began with opening statements from both sides. Claire's lawyer painted her as a hard-working professional, pushed to her limits by years of mistreatment and systemic neglect. "My client is not perfect," he admitted, "but she is human, and humans break under pressure when they're consistently undervalued and disrespected. What happened on that plane was regrettable, yes, but it was also a symptom of a much larger issue within the aviation industry." Amara's attorney countered by emphasizing the seriousness of physical violence and its impact on workplace safety. "Regardless of any perceived grievances, assaulting someone is never acceptable," he argued. "This isn't about class or privilege, it's about accountability. Allowing such behavior to go unpunished sets a dangerous precedent." As the AOI hearing progressed, witnesses were called to testify. Passengers from the flight described the tense atmosphere leading up to the altercation, with some siding firmly with Claire and others supporting Amara. Flight attendants who had worked alongside Claire spoke passionately about the challenges they faced daily: long hours, low pay, and frequent verbal abuse from passengers. One colleague recounted a particularly harrowing incident where a drunk traveler had threatened her physically, only for the airline to dismiss her complaint as not serious enough to warrant action. On Amara's side, friends and associates testified to her character, portraying her as a generous and kind-hearted individual who simply expected basic respect from those serving her. However, cross-examination revealed cracks in their narratives, especially when confronted with evidence of her past behavior on flights. A former flight attendant recalled an occasion where Amara had berated staff so severely that one crew member broke down in tears afterward. The revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, further complicating the already murky waters of public perception. Just as it seemed the panel might lean toward punishing Claire, an unexpected twist unfolded. Marcus Thompson, who had remained silent throughout most of the hearing, suddenly rose from his seat. His imposing figure commanded immediate attention as he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I want to say something. Not as a billionaire, not as a businessman, but as a father." He paused, glancing briefly at Amara before continuing. "When my daughter called me after the incident, I reacted out of anger and protectiveness. I wanted to make sure whoever hurt her paid for it. But over the past few weeks, I've had time to reflect on what truly matters here. This isn't just about one slap or one dress. It's about understanding why things escalated to that point in the first place." Marcus went on to acknowledge his role in enabling Amara's entitled behavior, admitting that he had spoiled her growing up and shielded her from consequences. "I failed as a parent," he confessed, his tone heavy with regret. "And because of that failure, my daughter developed habits that alienated people and created unnecessary conflict. That doesn't excuse what happened on the plane, but it does explain part of it." Turning to Claire, he added, "Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology. You didn't deserve to be treated the way my daughter treated you that night, or the way I treated you afterward by demanding your punishment. Instead of focusing on blame, we should focus on solutions. That's why I'm withdrawing all charges against you and pledging $10 million to improve working conditions for flight attendants worldwide." The announcement stunned everyone in the room. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Claire sat motionless, her eyes wide with disbelief. Amara, meanwhile, looked devastated, tears streaming down her face as she buried her head in her hands. Without another word, she stood abruptly and stormed out of the room, leaving behind a trail of whispers and speculation. In the days that followed, the fallout continued to reverberate. Claire kept her job, thanks in large part to Marcus's intervention, but the experience left lasting scars. She became a reluctant advocate for change in the aviation industry, using her platform to push for better protections and support for service workers. Though she still struggled with guilt over slapping Amara, she found solace in knowing her actions had sparked meaningful conversations about respect and humanity. For Amara, the aftermath was more complicated. Stripped of her father's protection and facing widespread criticism, she retreated from the public eye to reassess her life. Rumors swirled about strained relations between her and Marcus, though neither confirmed nor denied the reports. Eventually, she resurfaced months later with a new image, softer, humbler, and seemingly intent on rebuilding her reputation. Whether this transformation was genuine or merely a PR strategy remained unclear. As for Marcus Thompson, his decision to step back and admit fault earned him cautious praise from critics who had previously dismissed him as another out-of-touch billionaire. While his wealth and influence remained intact, he appeared genuinely committed to making amends, channeling his resources into initiatives aimed at improving workplace safety and fairness. Though the incident itself faded from headlines, over time its legacy endured. It served as a reminder that power dynamics are complex, that accountability is multifaceted, and that even the smallest moments of conflict can reveal deep truths about society. For Claire and Amara, the journey was far from easy, but it ultimately forced them both to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they lived in.